Free spirits, welcome back to another episode of Flying Upstream. If you have ever wondered whether the buzzwords making their way around the internet may be applicable to you, you're in the right place. Today we're exploring the world of narcissistic parenting with our guest, Scotti Moser. Scotti Moser is a transformational coach specializing in helping women break free from the toxic effects of narcissistic parenting. With her compassionate guidance, she empowers women to rediscover their authentic selves, regain their confidence, and reclaim their passion for life. Scotti has created proven strategies for emotional healing, boundary setting, and building resilience, providing her clients with the tools to live in peace, power, and purpose. Scotti, welcome to Flying Upstream.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
We're so excited to have you here today. So tell me, your work is all about helping women break free from the effects of this narcissistic parenting. But for many people,
Yes, I help professional women who are really struggling with the invisible barriers in their career, and it shows up everywhere. I focus on the career at first because that's a painful problem that needs fixing, right? If we aren't getting promoted, if we're getting passed over. But it shows up in our relationship to money, it shows up in our personal relationships, friendships, intimate relationships. It's kind of a big wad of bubblegum that we're holding that sticks to everything. So I really help women, first of all, recognize it, what's going on, and then clear it.
That's beautiful. I love that just having the awareness is a big step in that part of it too. And I would think for many people, the term of narcissistic parenting itself might feel like just another internet buzzword. But I'm curious to start kind of with the basics of this. What is narcissistic parenting?
Narcissistic parenting is big on the internet, and for good reason. In my opinion, it's because there are so many people with high narcissistic traits out there. And in my work, I'm not concerned with the personality disorder. So there's like the diagnosable personality disorder, the DSM, the 9 traits. And that's great, that's cool, but there's also this whole level of people below that maybe don't technically qualify, but are still very hard to deal with and still have a lot of high narcissistic traits. And when I say narcissistic traits, I mean things like low empathy. And low empathy is kind of a euphemism. It used to just flow right by my head, over my head, and I'd move on to the next one. But I really want to break it down for the listeners so they feel it, get it on a visceral level. And low empathy essentially means that they don't care how their actions affect you. They don't care. They don't care if showing up late makes you late. They don't care if their contempt and disdain and all of those things are having an impact on your psychological health. They don't care about you. So that's low empathy broken down into layman terms. And also they're really selfish. They're always going to put themselves first. Sometimes it might not look like it, because sometimes maybe putting you first once in a while actually serves them. So in those instances, they will. Really selfish, really low empathy, they carry a lot of arrogance. And there's a couple different types of narcissists. There's the big outspoken ones that really like to talk a lot. And then there's the covert narcissists who a lot of us miss because they're small and they don't talk, they don't really share, but they have that victim-y, and they still carry the same entitlement, low selfishness, and low empathy. And the entitlement is another big one, and that simply means that they feel entitled to treat you the way they do. They feel entitled to the best of everything, the best that you have to give, and they don't give a second thought about it. So when you lump those big traits together, you get a really high conflict, difficult person to deal with.
Yes, that sounds like a lot. So you mentioned some personality traits that maybe noticeable. What are other signs that someone could look out for to see if they've been affected by narcissistic parenting, and why is it so important?
It's silent abuse, and it's important because it's holding us back, and it's really an emotional drain on us throughout our lives. One of the major impacts of a narcissistic childhood or childhood under narcissistic parents is overwhelm. Overwhelm can be a trauma response, and we carry a lot of overwhelm as survivors because the root of overwhelm is when we were faced with situations that overwhelmed our ability to handle them. And for some of us, that happened on a daily basis. And that energy, that emotion, and that thought pattern gets stuck in our system. And so we go through life in an almost constant state of overwhelm. I know that's what I was doing. And that's just one of the unpleasant emotions that survivors deal with. And you mix those together, grief, sadness, anger, and you're carrying around a lot of burden. And it shows up. For me, I'll just tell a story. For me, one of the biggest ways it showed up to limit me was in what I call the vow to be invisible. To survive in my family of origin, I had to be a wallflower. It went much better for me if I shrunk back into the wallpaper and I showed up on command to serve that narcissistic parent. I wasn't allowed to carry a big, bold energy or to express an opinion or to have my own ideas. I had to have their ideas and their opinions. And so when I got out in my professional life, I broke out in hives when I would go into my boss's office. And I was 25 years old. I had no idea why this was happening. And I thought I would outgrow it. And I kept waiting. And I got to my mid 30s and I realized this fear of public speaking, yes, but just speaking to anyone ever in general, just answering the phone, it's embarrassing even now to admit it, was really holding me back. And I decided I had to get to the roots of what was really going on here. And it was because I had this vow to be invisible. And that's how I survived in my family. So when I even thought about stepping up and expressing an opinion and stating an idea, or even just being loud and boisterous, that sent off life or death triggers, sensations, warnings in my nervous system, and it would just shut me right down. At first, physically in the hives, I eventually was able to, through breathing exercises, turn those down a bit, and then I really released the rest of that vow to be invisible through recovery from the narcissistic abuse. And I can keep going. Would you like to hear another one?
I'm interested. You mentioned a little bit about your own childhood, and I'm interested to hear more about what uh, what the transition was like for you from being a victim of narcissistic parenting to realizing what was happening and taking control to begin your healing journey.
I grew up with two narcissistic parents, the covert, kind of quiet, silent, victim-like narcissistic father, completely self-centered, everything, the patriarchal stereotype, everything revolved around him. He was the head of the home and he had the final say. And we all had to sit around the dinner table and eat our dinner meekly. And then there's never, in my opinion, there's never a non-offending parent. If you have an abusive situation going on, the other parent is always culpable in some way. And my mom allowed it to happen. She was a narcissist in her own way. She was completely focused on herself, and she had decided that the way that she was going to survive was to make him happy. And a lot of people call that codependency. You might recognize it under that term, but her whole world revolved around, meeting his eccentric, erratic, impulsive needs, trying to keep him from losing his temper and flying off into a rage. So that's the type of environment that I grew up in. And I coped by being perfect and trying harder. That worked up to a point to get all the grades and do all the sports and be the model child and make them look good. And I went through college and I went through law school, and that served me really well. And I went out into the professional world, and it still did up to a point. But when I wanted to step into a leadership role, that perfectionism can really keep you stuck because it is a buzzkill, first of all. Someone who's always focused on the micromanaging details isn't a very fun person to be around. I think that at work, we like to surround ourselves with other big visionary thinkers. And if you're caught up in the minutiae and constantly tense all the time, it doesn't really work out. It makes it really hard to delegate and step into a leadership position. And for a number of reasons, that perfectionism I eventually found really stifling.
Yes, I feel like so much what you're talking about is really resonating with me too, in just that the culture I was brought up in, which was similar to what you're talking about, is it served me too for a while, but then I got to a point where it didn't do anything for me, right? Like I had a major life change. I was let go from my job along with my entire department. And I knew I couldn't go back to another toxic work environment, but I had no idea to move forward because what I was taught is being perfect is the most the best thing you can achieve in life, right? It's having a good job, having a good title, and I just couldn't fight it any longer. I couldn't go back to it, but I had no skills on how to move forward.
I can relate, yes. And that they're so strong because they're literally survival coping mechanisms stuck in your nervous system. So when you go to do something new, it clamps down in this life or death physical hold. And so I think it really is a process, a commendable process to step out and really break that perfectionism. And then it punishes you because every time you're not perfect, which is quite often, at least I felt this overwhelming shame, this I'm going to get in big trouble, I'm going to get fired, all these bad things. And depending on the severity of my imperfection, my screw up, I could spin out mentally for a couple of days and just live in this misery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What would you say are some of the long-term impacts of having narcissistic parents and how they keep showing up in our lives again and again?
Yes, that vow to be invisible, the vow to be perfect. And also, I think a lot of us have an unconscious vow, or which is a belief that we have to conform to our family of origin, no matter how difficult that is for us. So unconsciously, if they struggled with money, we struggle with money because at some deep visceral level, it doesn't feel right to just have it be easy and have it come in. And we really feel that we don't deserve it. And a big part of the narcissistic abuse is the scapegoating, which is when the narcissist unloads or projects their worth issues and their shame onto someone else. And a defenseless child sitting there is often that someone else. And so I know I was told that I was worthless, that I didn't have a brain in my head, that I would never amount to anything, that I was going to have to work really, really hard to overcome all of these flaws that I had. And that really leaves you with, I think we call it imposter syndrome, this shaky, almost non existent foundation to go out into the world. And I know for me, I kept coming back to this core belief over and over. I'm fundamentally flawed. There is something wrong with me. And I kept trying to fix that in a myriad of different ways. And I could never fix it good enough. And all of that striving energy leads to burnout, it leads to exhaustion, it leads to depression. It's very anxiety inducing. So our overall quality of life is really dampened, and we can carry that effect of the narcissistic parenting for a long time.
Yes. And I'd love to hear how you kind of manage this with your own family because some people may think, well, just cut out that parent from your life, and that can be extreme. And is that the best way to do it? Just cut that person out? Or because some of this trauma can live with you, how do you repair or even maintain a relationship with somebody who has been so abusive to you in this way?
Every person finds their own way in this area. It's highly individualized. I've tried them all. I I for a long time I didn't realize what was going on, so I just carried on. And when I started to get a handle and do my own work and develop my coaching program within with the structure of narcissistic abuse, I had unknowing, completely unconsciously, I had magical thinking, which is a common symptom of a narcissistic abuse survivor. So I thought I was going to be the one exception, the one person that could handle it. I would be fully healed and it would just roll off my back like nothing, and it wouldn't matter. And I could be around them as much or as little as I wanted to. And I could have this fulfilling life with my narcissist right there involved in it. So I tried that for about 4 years, and I'm always I have my own coaches and my own work, and it became abundantly clear throughout that time that that a lot of survivors have what's called complex PTSD, which is when you're in a situation for a long period of time. Post PTSD is usually a war, something more acute, whereas complex, in my opinion, means spanning many years and you can't get out. Well, I coined a new term. I had ongoing TSD because I just kept exposing myself to it over and over and over again. And for me, the point I'm at right now is I had to very, very minimal, almost no contact. And after I did that, I felt my nervous system release and I really started to make huge strides. I probably felt better the last few months where I've been doing this than I did the whole previous 4 years put together, just getting out of that toxic situation. Some people aren't ready to do that or can't do that. And so there's methods like gray rock where you kind of steel yourself and you are a gray rock, you don't respond at all. And I think that works really effectively for shorter periods of times. I think it's soul killing to have to gray rock for long periods of times because I tried that to gray rock for long periods of time and consistently. And I just felt completely shut down. So, in my opinion, as you move forward, minimizing contact, you start to realize that you don't deserve this and it feels more natural to you to minimize that contact. And I think that really escalates your healing, but it's no walk in the park, and it's a lot of hard decisions that we're faced with in all of those relationships.
Yes. And I imagine for many people out there, it's very hard to break out of this toxic situation and the cycle that keeps repeating itself because society teaches us that to be a good child means you're obedient, you're loyal, self-sacrificing, and these ideas that are ingrained in us keep us trapped in these unhealthy relationships. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's two huge beliefs that I found that really keep us stuck in that parent-child unhealthy relationship. And the first is first of all, let me say that we've been groomed and trained for our entire lives to believe these two beliefs. And the first one is that the parents' emotions are more important than ours. And second, that it's our job to caretake those emotions. And boy, those are strong, ironclad. When I came up against those, I could feel them. It felt so unnatural to me to put myself first, even though I recognize I get nothing out of this relationship. I have to steel myself. I have to make a plan, and it's always about them and doing what they need and want. Even though I knew all that, it still felt so familiar and so comfortable to put their emotional state first and to caretake that emotional state.
Yes. I mean, I know in a lot of cultures too that honoring parents, no matter what, is a deeply rooted tradition. So, how might someone break free from these expectations without feeling like they're betraying their parents or their roots in their culture?
I think there's I think it's a two-step process, this part of it. And the first is to learn as much as one can about the narcissistic abuse, because it's very subtle and it's very nuanced, and a lot of part of it is gaslighting. So a lot of people that surround you may gaslight you and say that, it's not that bad, it's not that serious, and then we learn to gaslight ourselves. So, really understanding the nuances and the subtleties of what has happened or is still happening to you. And then, in my opinion, you have to incorporate some type of mind body healing, because all of these patterns and emotions, vows, are held in our nervous system. In my program, I use emotional freedom technique, or tapping, as it's called, to get that emotional body release. There's other ways to do it. There's traumatic yoga programs and breathing classes, but to really start freeing your nervous system and your body from these core beliefs that you've been holding. And I wouldn't and for me, it worked best to not worry about taking action, to not worry about setting boundaries or the amount of contact. I would do the emotional work first for several months, usually 2 to 4 months, before I was ready to take that action step, before it felt natural enough and I felt confident enough in myself to take that action, because the nervous system would just shut me down. It felt way too hard, and I literally physically couldn't do it. But with the help of the tapping, I was able to get there always eventually.
Hmm. That's amazing. I was actually just going to ask about, aside from traditional therapy, what other unconventional or excuse me, what other unconventional or alternative methods have you found to be most effective from breaking free from those emotional wounds? Is there any other ones you would add to that?
I really like the clearing and forgiveness work. It's called. It's called peacemaking, and it's where I walk through with my clients, and we list out all of the times that they or their ancestors, because it can be held in the lineage. It can go way back, and I really, they're kind of in a subconscious or hypnotic almost state, a light hypnosis, and things come in for them, and it can be things like wars, famine, all the times. And then I do a peacemaking, clearing, forgiveness process around those issues that have followed us sometimes from our ancestors and our lineage.
Hmm, that sounds really powerful. I'm curious to know how, when someone is doing this work, how can they also shift their mindset from victim mentality to one of empowered and personal responsibility without dismissing their pain?
Well, if we're carrying around the belief, first of all, I don't think the pain ever gets dismissed until it's been fully felt and processed. And so to to release it. And that doesn't mean we have to relive it, but we have to accept it and do the tapping or the breathing or whatever your mode of choice is, and really acknowledge that it's there. We don't have to go through event by event. In that emotion is many events bound up. But I think we release and acknowledge that sensation, and that's honoring what happened to us, and all of the sensations, whether it's pain, hurt, sadness, loss, whatever it is, it gets felt, and then it will release. And then when we release that, the thought process almost automatically shifts. If we felt that we were fundamentally flawed, all of that energy, all of the emotion supporting that, as that leaves our body, then our thoughts can shift more naturally and easily.
That makes sense. So, as children of narcissistic parents grow up and become parents themselves, what are some ways that we can ensure we're not unconsciously repeating the same behaviors with our own children?
Do the work, do the work, do the work. And by the work, I mean 5 steps. The first, I've already mentioned a little bit, it's understanding what happened to you, making sense of what happened to you. The second step is doing some sort of emotional, physical release work to release this from your system. The third is to gain some distance from your narcissistic parent. And the fourth is to create safe, healthy relationships. I almost said selfie, coined a new term. Create safe, healthy relationships. And number 5 is to live in defiance of the narcissistic parent's rules. And I recommend just putting those on repeat on your refrigerator and running them through your system, because I know from personal experience, sometimes parenting situations come up and every cell in your body wants to react the same way your parents did. And it feels like the easiest way. In my case, it's to lose my mind and throw a big temper tantrum myself because that's what I deserve, because this child is being difficult. And it was a matter of, for me, I would tap through it, get that emotional release, and then recognize that the rule that was coming in, it's a big part of it is awareness, and then deciding for myself what was my route, what healthy route I was going to choose. So I wouldn't just run on that unconscious, this is the way it's always been done. And it's not easy stuff. It's especially for me in the toddler years, it got a lot easier after those, but it was super hard because you're experiencing parenting for the first time. And then you have this toddler, which is this irrational being there that is not going to meet you at, you have to come down to them. They are physically capable of going up. And so that was a lot of work for me, but I think it was worth it.
Yes, I'm there. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old right now. So I feel that. I definitely can relate to that too. I have caught myself many times, the words on the tip of my tongue almost coming out, and then, oh no, 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 don't do it.
That's it. You're doing it. You're doing the work, the awareness, and the somehow, some way stopping yourself until you can reset. And that's like a train of emotion, and just giving yourself the time to do that reset and make your own choice.
Yes, for sure. I think I wonder if I personally am like too aware. Like I do have this deep fear of damaging my children in the same way that I feel like I have had some damage done to me. And it's a fine line for me sometimes where I want to be so aware and try to react to every situation in a healthy way, give my kids space to share their feelings, make sure they're heard, but not go so overboard that I'm not instilling some boundaries to them.
Right. I totally relate to what you're saying, because I feel that I was just learning all of this new when my kids were that age. I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I was putty. Luckily my husband was able to be the grounded, more, when they got to the place that they were capable of it, they're going to they have certain expectations that they have to meet, and he was really good at modeling for me how to set those expectations with them in a really healthy, firm but loving way. Nobody had ever set a firm but loving expectation with me. It was blah, yelling and screaming all of the time. So once I saw him do it, it made sense that I couldn't do it. I had no idea what I was supposed to. I knew what I wasn't supposed to be doing, but I hadn't been able to take that next step into setting firm boundaries. And so he was really helpful in just realizing what that next step was. It's not to let them run roughshod all over your life, but to set a firm and healthy boundaries when it's appropriate.
Right. And tell me a little bit about the role that community plays for somebody who is maybe been a child of a narcissistic parent and is now trying to do a better job with their own kids in terms of finding other parents or a community online or in person. What is that like, and how important is that?
Well, I left this out for a long time in my recovery because narcissism is very isolating, and we're isolated a lot as kids, and we keep recreating that isolation in our adult lives. So I'm glad you brought this up because it is pillar number 4 in recovery, creating safe, healthy relationships. And once you start to open up, because I unconsciously thought, every person was there to reject me. Every person was there to criticize me at some level. And if I, laughed wrong or made some thoughtless comment, I was going to get the hammer. And once I started to let go of some of that and was able to open up, was able to attract in some safe, healthy people, it was amazing that have the same parenting mindset that my husband and I share. It's really supportive. It gives you that nice mental break, people that are willing to watch your kids and you can reciprocate. So they give you that actual physical break, but also that validation, that healthy validation, because in your tribe, in your family of origin, you might feel like you're swimming upstream, the name of this podcast, raising your children. I know my parents don't approve of a lot of the ways I'm raising my children. My parents think my kids need a lot more discipline, a lot more chores, all the same stuff. I kind of thought that they would evolve and be different as grandparents, and they really did not, which is par for the course in this type of personality. But to have that group that says, like you do, like, I don't want to do it that way, and I want to give them room and feel safe to express their ideas and learn according to their timeline and their abilities, that is just this big energy boost. It's like an energy rocket under you. It really is. And we might have a couple. I know my sister has struggled with this, and I think it's that expectation of rejection. You might have to try a few times. You might not hit your group right away. And I really encourage people that are in that spot to keep experimenting and keep trying with different people, because when you find your fit, it's totally worth it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we have one last question for you as we wind down here. So now that we are enlightened and informed, thanks to you, how can friends, partners, or loved ones support someone who is healing from narcissistic parenting?
The most important thing is to listen and understand, because it is incredibly nuanced, and often on the outside it looks completely fine, it looks completely normal, it looks above average. Plus they somehow created you, so it couldn't have been that bad, right? Like they created you, but there's a lot going on under the surface, and just really giving that person the space to share the stories, the nuances. And if you're a spouse, what my husband did is he really observed, like, no, your parents aren't that bad. Like, no, really watch what happens when I open my mouth. And we would come home and he would say, you're right. You're right. They do have it. You have a criticism magnet on your forehead, and it is different than with everybody else. And so I think that sort of validation is so lovely and profound. And that is what I would advise supporters to do. Really be open to the survivor's side and be willing to look behind the curtain that the narcissist has hung.
Wow, this has been such a powerful conversation. Scotti, I really want to thank you for helping us challenge these deeply ingrained beliefs around family, healing, and self-worth. Breaking free from toxic conditioning isn't easy, but it's so necessary for living authentically. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And for our listeners out there, if today's episode resonated with you, know that you are not alone. Healing doesn't have to follow a traditional path, and you don't have to stay trapped in a toxic family dynamics just because society tells you to. If you want to dive deeper into this journey, be sure to connect with Scotti Moser. You can find her on Instagram as Scotti Moser Coaching and on her website, scottimoser.com, where she offers coaching and resources for those ready to break the cycle. And if you enjoyed the conversation, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time as we continue questioning the status quo and exploring the road less traveled. Free spirits, until next time, remember, keep flying up.